Welcome to the Bible Forum. This is Warren Sprouse. It's June 18th, 2011, and we're here talking to you about the things that are going on in the world in light of the Word of God and what of the Bible. I want to talk a little bit of contemporary eschatology, the doctrine of final things, Revelation, the end of the seasons, or end of ages, and all the rest of it. We have been through an event, several events in the last week. We saw the shooter in Alexandria. We learned his name. His name is James Hodgkinson. He attacked members of the Republican congressional contingency as they were practicing baseball in preparation for the annual Republican-Democrat charity baseball game. We learned little bit later on that he had a home inspection business that he had from 1994 until recently, when the county in Illinois where he lived and worked lifted his permit. It is said to have been for cause, meaning he wasn't doing a good job. He volunteered for Bernie Sanders in the Bernie Sanders for President group there in Illinois. He was considered a rabid progressive socialist. There's a picture of him holding a sign that reads, "Tax the rich. Tell Reagan's trickle-down economics we need 20 brackets and $20 billion. He left his wife in Illinois earlier this year. He apparently traveled to Washington, D.C. area, been living out of his car for the last 3 months. He asked some congressmen who were leaving early, who was it that was practicing on the ball field. Learning they were Republicans, he walked away toward that ball field. Apparently, he then took his automatic rifle and at least one handgun and proceeded to the third base dugout. And standing behind that is where he opened fire on anybody he could see. The lesson we learn here is that this is where irresponsible rhetoric can take those who are not very intelligent or very sophisticated. It can take those who are desperate and or easily influenced by their own circumstances to view people as enemies or friends rather than simply people. Political discourse in America of late has bordered on hate speech. Primarily, this is coming from the left, who see themselves out of power and are concerned that their political power or policies and programs could be damaged and or eliminated. And some of us on this side of the thing say, we hope so. But the tone of their speech and actions indicates desperation. They're not like politicians of the past who say, okay, we lost the election, we'll work to get it back next time. No. They want to torpedo the one that's here. And when this sort of thing happens over a long period of time, especially with the technology that allows for highly segregated and selective reporting, those who are not informed, not educated, not balanced, arrive at political and social positions that are quite honestly not real. It happens on both sides of the political and social spectrum. In Hodgkinson's case, he represents a man who had limited information and tremendous financial, social, and emotional pressure in his life. He was 50 years old. He's living out of his car. He belonged to a group calling themselves Terminate the Republican Party. Among other things, this group advocates for exposing Republican fraud, boycotting the Republican Party. Liberal Democratic Socialist Party is the one they want to belong to. Investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election with slogans like, I hate Donald Trump, a revolution street team. Boycott the Koch brothers, industries and products, healthcare and education burners united to resist Trump. Join the Occupy Army. There's no objective way of really knowing what was going on in this man's head other than what he did to express himself. He was a failure at business, largely due to his own careless performance. He was a failure at marriage, leaving his wife to fend for herself. A failure at critical thinking. He bought into the progressive ideal. That's illogical. Now, not everybody's going to agree with any of these or all of these. But the first two should be obvious just based on his behavior. The last one is subjective, suggesting that if you're a progressive, you're not thinking right. But look at it. What does the Progressive Party, the progressive philosophy, mean? It means the government should take care of citizens' basic needs. It means the government knows best what benefits the individual. It means government should have control over wealth in this country. It means government should compensate for my irresponsibility. And no matter how much it costs, and no matter how much power they have to assume in order to make this happen. Progressivism is not new. Progressivism is at least as old as communism. Teddy Roosevelt ran on the progressive ticket in 1912. Cousin Franklin moved to extend the economic downturn of the 1930s until it became in history known as the Great Depression. Economists have told us for decades how he kept this country in poverty, kept business on their knees while he created systems and programs that made citizens dependent upon government. And if it weren't for World War II, which he did not want to get into, we would have all been progressives by the 1960s. His signature issue was Social Security. Think about that. Social Security. Socialism. Government money taking care of you. Programs like welfare and national health care are built on the idea that government has an obligation to make certain that citizens do not suffer for their lack or for their carelessness. This is something the careless and the feeble celebrate, but something the productive and the capable end up paying for. And everything else works just fine until we start being more careless and more feeble as a nation, simply because we can or because we aren't motivated to do any better. Then the system starts to come unglued. More people collecting benefits than paying taxes. Calls to raise the taxes, increase the benefits, meaning more people are going to need the benefits. And the cycle ends with government control over every area of your life. The feeble-minded, the indoctrinated, along with those who make decisions based on how they feel, see this as a good thing. Good, that is, until they are wards of the state, living in high-rise apartments in government-mandated zones with no property, no prospects. Do you know in Russia, the Russians know not to buy Russian-built automobiles. Russian-built automobiles are not the best cars on the market. You don't see any over here. They're not reliable. They're not worth what you pay. Why? Well, because the assembly lines are manned by people with no incentive to do a good job. The James Hodkinsons of this world do what they do because they have no hope. And therein lies the rub. The liberal, progressive, communist policies always lead to no hope. Now, some Americans have no problem with this. They don't want to work. They have no aspirations past their daily food, entertainment, drugs, alcohol, and sex. Most will either fight against it or morph into depression. Fighting against it is where Hodgkinson and all the people like him come in. This man wanted others to take care of his problems. When they didn't or couldn't, he lashed out against his supposed enemies. On the other side are people who want to take care of themselves. In a progressive socialist state, you cannot permit that, except in very limited ways under strict control. Our education system is creating social automatons, denying students objective information and traditional academic stimulation. Our religious system is creating spiritual automatons. Our economic system is creating haves and have-nots. Our psychological system is drugging people who can't handle any of the above. Our news outlets carefully craft public opinion, reinforcing all of this stuff, while our political system rewards those who support these systems. Donald Trump and the revitalization he is stimulating is the problem. There are no doubt many problems with what he's doing, or at least how he's doing them, but the overall impact has traditionally minded and politically conservative citizens hopeful for the first time in years. Maybe, just maybe, we can climb out of the hole the progressives have dug for us over the last 45 years. We like to think that George W. Bush was a conservative president, and he was, but only to a point. Without 9/11, we may have seen more of his progressive philosophy at work. He's good friends with both the Clintons and the Obamas, beyond just the fact that they come from the same club. And when you look at Bush's children, they're not conservative thinkers. They're liberals. And in terms of Christianity, and he got elected to a large extent because he was an evangelical Christian. I try to tell you, he wasn't going to an evangelical Christian church, and his mouth isn't saved or sanctified, and he doesn't always portray a spiritual testimony. Say, oh, you're judging him. If it walks like a duck and it quacks, it's probably a duck. But such is the political class, saying what voters want to hear, doing what the globalists want done. And the only real solution to absolute control over citizens. They have to stop people like me, and they have to set out to do this cradle to grave. They do it where we live, in terms of what we know and what we spend and what we believe. You can't just let people grow helter-skelter. And the only place we see this being worked out is in the Bible, in Revelation chapter 13, with the mark of the beast. You're not allowed to buy or sell unless the government stamps your approval. And if you don't have the stamp, they hunt you down like a dog and they cut your head off. Yeah, they cut your head off. Guillotine. Bible points to it. Isn't that interesting? On the other side of all of this, oddly enough, is California Governor Brown, Jerry Brown. He's been a vocal supporter of the Paris Climate Accord, in which the United States was supposed to give billions of dollars to countries that would not have to meet the same pollution limits as we did, according to a report in something called the G2 Bulletin. Brown was getting ready to, quote, take on the role of America's de facto climate ambassador, end of quote, according to the Huffington Post. He boasted, according to the report, California, in terms of its economy, is the 5th largest in the world and a gross domestic product of more than $2.4 trillion. He said, we have Silicon Valley, we have a fabulous agricultural sector, movies, biotech, and many different and diverse businesses and universities. He said, that's a real nation state. But with President Trump pulling the U.S. out of the Paris climate deal, he said, We have to intensify all that we're doing. With Trump going AWOL on climate change, the rest of the country and the rest of the world have to react. And the reaction has to be to intensify our efforts to decarbonize our economy. How? We're not the federal government. We're a state government. But we're a powerful state government. We have 9 other states that agree with us. Martin Armstrong, who posts at Martin Armstrong Economics, said, quote, "This is clearly treason, and all federal funds should be cut off from the secessionist governments of California, New York, Washington, who have unilaterally and completely illegally entered into a foreign treaty rejecting the President of the United States on the Paris Accord." He quoted the U.S. Constitution. It says, "No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold or silver coin and tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder ex post facto law or law impairing the obligation of contracts," end of quote. The Constitution also references a ban on state taxes on imports and a ban on states entering, quote, "into any agreement or compact with any other state or with any foreign power," end of quote. This is how far progressives are willing to go. Will he be tried for treason? In the same vein, the left is adamant that there's a collusion in regard to the Trump-Russia connection, and that he fired FBI Director Comey to stop any of that from being exposed. But facts are funny things. Judge Andrew Napolitano tells us that according to the Constitution, the president can fire anyone he wants for any reason. That the Trump administration leaks like a sieve. If there was a smoking gun here, he said we would all know it by now. He said it is constitutionally impossible for a sitting president to commit obstruction by directing the FBI to stop or start an investigation, because the FBI is not technically an independent government agency. They work for the president. He is the chief executive. He said the elements of obstruction are clearly delineated and they simply do not appear in this case. However, they do appear and they do exist in the Clinton email scandal. Hillary showed, quote, "specific intent," end of quote, in violating criminal statutes by retaining classified information on her private email server. Simply having such a server is a violation of law. Her crime is being shoved under the rug, using the specific intent wording, while Trump's lawful behavior is being characterized as specific intent to violate a statute. Is that an opinion? No. It's a legal determination by a constitutional lawyer. But it doesn't stop Democrats from saying all sorts of irresponsible things about what's going on. Florida International University law professor Elizabeth Foley said on MSNBC just last week the FBI director works for the Attorney General and the Attorney General works for the President. All of these individuals have lost their jobs or have their jobs by the pleasure of the President's appointment with the advice and consent of the Senate. They can be fired by him at any time for any reason. If President Trump is doing something within his constitutional discretionary authority, he can certainly say, investigate, or alternately, don't investigate. If people don't like the actions of Trump, the actions he took with Comey, then Foley explained that there are 2 political pushback mechanisms that people can take: impeach the president and remove him from office, or vote someone different in 2020. What are the enumerated powers, constitutionally enumerated powers of the president? The Constitution tells us that the executive branch of government operates under something called the unitary executive theory. Under this theory, the president is the chief executive officer of the federal government and sole head of the executive branch. He is also the only person in the executive branch who is accountable to the voters, as he and he alone, along with the vice president, who is largely a figurehead, has been elected by those voters. As such, this unitary executive theory informs everyone in the executive branch of the federal government works at the pleasure of the president. Were this not the case, then vast areas of governance would occur and vast government resources could be spent by people who are unaccountable to the voters. And then the government is unaccountable to the voters that lacks their consent. The consent of the governed is the linchpin, the bedrock of our popular government in America. There are, of course, vast areas of government that are not responsive to the people and that lack the consent of the governed. The administrative agencies that write, interpret, and enforce their own regulations, and what's called the deep state, the secret parts of the financial intelligence and law enforcement entities of the government that never change and operate below the radar with budgets that never see the light of day, that defy the notion of this idea of the consent of the government or the governed as the sole legitimate basis for government in America. The FBI is not in the administrative state or the deep state. It is front and center as the premier law enforcement agency of the United States government. It is far from perfect, and its leaders are as fallible as the rest of us, but we have hired these people who work there to enforce the federal laws that implicate our freedoms and our safety. And we have hired the president to exercise his discretion as to which laws shall be enforced and against whom. The Comey testimony revealed serious efforts to reject the public policy of independence and return to the unitary executive. Comey revealed a DOJ under former Attorney General Loretta Lynch in lockstep with the Obama White House and determined to exonerate Hillary Clinton in the espionage investigation concerning her emails, no matter where the evidence might have led. He also revealed his own view that President Trump's orders and quid pro quo offer with respect to Flynn were unlawful. The result? Today we have a White House under siege. The new DOJ criminal investigation that the president is no doubt the subject of will attempt to discover whether he corruptly attempted to interfere with the work of an independent FBI and whether he attempted to bribe its then director. The White House is also subject to the 5 congressional investigations involving the Russians in the 2016 election, the firing of Director Comey, the recusal of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and a whole lot of other things. The investigation of Clinton is back from the grave for a third time, trying to find out if she did anything wrong. Was she then exonerated because of a lack of evidence or the lack of will on the part of the Obama administration? Judge Napolitano believes these are perilous times for men and women of goodwill and intellectual honesty who are charged with enforcing our laws and running the government. The government should not be terrifying, but it must be fair and transparent. And it must always enjoy the consent of the governed, for without that consent, it is illegitimate. Napolitano is a former judge of the Superior Court of New Jersey, a senior judicial analyst at Fox News, and something of a constitutional scholar. You need to listen to him.